name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think most of you know me. Those who don't know me, my name is Father Stephen Kostoff. I'm an Orthodox priest in Cincinnati, Ohio. My parish is Christ the Savior, Holy Spirit, in the Midwest Diocese of the Orthodox Church in America. I'm a first generation here in America. My parents are both from Macedonia, the village of Boof. Grew up with a very Macedonian culture. My first parish was in fact St. Kliment of Ohridski on 25th Street in Detroit. So first 17 years of my life were spent in that parish. So kind of a link here, since today's talk is about the legacy of St. Kliment of Ohridski. And again, he was our patron saint for many years. So wonderful saint indeed. So I'll try and share a little bit about him. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a professional historian. I just kind of read read other historians, other scholars, and put together some notes and try and come up with a coherent picture of this particular saint of the medieval period. So I gave a talk 4 years ago in 2019 in Detroit. That was in the legacy of St. Cyril and Methodius. This is a very good continuation of that. I have to repeat a good deal of what I said there. Not a good deal, but I have to do some repetition. I'm sure no one remembers that talk 4 years ago, so I'm okay. I don't feel bad about repeating anything here today. Anyway, so human nature is unchanging, but people who lived in the 9th and 10th century obviously had a different world, different environment, socially, culturally, religiously. So we have to kind of reconstruct that environment a little bit here to give a kind of a bigger picture. We call that contextualizing. Can we contextualize this particular saint, St. Clement, and those who are around him? Even Jesus himself, even Jesus had to be given a context. Who he was as a Jew in Palestine. So everybody lives in a particular historical, cultural, social, religious environment. We have to try and capture that a little bit here before I get into the details. So, but in doing that, I would simply say, in the first Christian millennium, first 1,000 years of Christianity, we're going up to the year 916 when St. Clement died. In those first 1,000 years, we spoke of Christians, the Christian West and the Christian East. The Christian West was very Latin-based, a Latin-based culture, linguistically and socially and culturally, centered in Rome, of course. To this day, we know of the Vatican City. Still, Rome continues to the present day. The Christian East was, of course, Greek-speaking, basically, initially, Syriac-speaking further to the east. So you have these two different kind of cultural, theological worlds, Christian West and Christian East in the first millennium. But there's harmony, a great deal of harmony initially. By the 9th and 10th century, with which we are concerned, you start seeing the two worlds falling apart or splintering. That'll lead to the great schism of 1054, when Christian West, Christian East go their own particular ways, based upon theological, ecclesiological differences, of course. So, but for the first 1,000 years, Christianity held together pretty well with a lot of cultural diversity and linguistic diversity. So we're more interested in the Christian East here. So the Christian East is now called the Byzantine world of Byzantium. And the world of Byzantium was centered in Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, as we know. And the Christian East was very kind of a Greek-based culture initially. The church fathers wrote in Greek. Greek was disseminated to different countries where the gospel was preached. So by the year 900, 800, 900, 1000, we're starting to see a lot of missionary activity in all of Europe. Northern Europe is being converted to Christianity. The Scandinavian countries, parts of Germany, even a little further to the east. So Byzantium, the Christian East in Byzantium, began to evangelize and missionize the Slavic peoples in the Balkans. Now the Balkans, with different peoples marauded through the Balkans through the centuries, Avars and Huns and all kinds, even Goths. By the 6th, 7th century, you find Slavic tribes entering into the Balkans. Historians now tell us, looking to the 7th century, that the Slavic tribes began to really settle in the Balkans under the reign of the Emperor Heraclius. These different Slavic tribes probably spoke different dialects, perhaps, different little variety of their language. They start settling in the 7th century. So these Slavic tribes that are settling by the 7th century are in conflict with Byzantium often. They are pagan. They're not Christian. The Byzantine Empire extends up into the Balkans. That whole Roman Empire of the past is still kind of intact, having been restored by Justinian back in the 6th century. So the Balkans under the Byzantine Empire's control or hegemony. The Slavic tribes looking for independence. They're pagan. There's a conflict there culturally, linguistically. All those issues are kind of working here. So by the 9th century, we find these Slavic peoples or Slavic little princedoms seeking entrance into the Byzantine world. Now, a very good historian, Dmitry Ohridski, called it the Byzantine Commonwealth. The Byzantine Commonwealth meant this whole kind of cultural, religious, unity, falling under, Byzantine, which is kind of a Hellenistic cultural manifestation. So the Byzantine Commonwealth is very attractive to the pagan Slavic tribes outside of Byzantium. And there's a conflict there. So they're seeking to be evangelized and Christianized, become part of this cultural world called Byzantium or the Byzantine Commonwealth. That's a kind of a really brief summary there. So by the 9th century, in Byzantium, the theological disputes have been settled. A lot of theological disputes in the whole Eastern Roman Empire, the so-called Age of Ecumenical Councils. The Seventh Council met in the year 787. Iconoclasm was settled by the year 843. At that point, the Slavic tribes begin seeking to be evangelized. So the first one is Prince Rostislav of Moravia. He speaks to the Emperor Michael III. He's looking for evangelists, and the ones who are sent are, of course, Constantine and Methodius. Constantine is Cyril's initial name. He becomes Cyril when he dies on his deathbed, when he's tonsured a monk when he dies. So these missionaries will go to Moravia and they'll proclaim the gospel. But before they do that, they come up with an alphabet. We're pretty much aware of this, I believe. They come up with an alphabet, the so-called Glagolitic alphabet. And the Glagolitic alphabet was established by St. Constantine, helped by St. Methodius. And we'll get back to St. Clement in a little while. St. Clement probably worked on the Glagolitic alphabet in Asia Minor before they went off on their missionary trip to Moravia. So that's a little bit of the background here. So we know about St. Cyril Methodius going to Moravia, trying to preach the gospel. I want to read a particular historian here, he summarizes the whole importance of this work here. His name is Marvin Cantnor. He writes the following: adopting the Bulgaro-Macedonian dialect for this purpose, he modeled this literary language on Byzantine Greek syntax and word formation, using it for the enrichment of vocabulary and religious and legal terminology. Glagolitic, not Cyrillic, which bears his name, was an entirely new invention and showed his keen ability to distinguish and represent the phonological structure of the Slavic language very precisely. What an incredibly powerful effect it must have had on the Slavs of Moravia, when from the east these two missionaries came to them bearing books written in Slavic in such an impressive style. That's a historian giving a nice summary there. This Glagolitic alphabet was based on a modified form of certain Greek, Hebrew, and other Oriental letters. According to modern scholars, to this day, Constantine was thought to be a linguistic genius, still ranking among the greatest philologists produced in Europe. Okay. One more text here from Dmitry Ohridski. Thus was created a new literary language based on the spoken dialect of the Macedonian Slavs, modeled on Greek and largely ecclesiastical in character. It is known to modern scholars as Old Church Slavonic. So whenever you hear Old Church Slavonic in a church, that's the ancient language based on the kind of Bulgaro-Macedonian dialect of the Balkan Peninsula, formed back in the 9th century. There's first the Glagolitic alphabet. You ever seen the Glagolitic alphabet? It looks very bizarre.
Yes,
like,
it's
what
very
in the world
hard
is
to read.
that? You know, so it's a very complex-looking language indeed. The Cyrillic being much more simple. The Cyrillic probably goes back to late 9th century Bulgaria. We'll get to that shortly here. We're familiar with the Cyrillic alphabet, Cyrillic lettering from a Slavic background. The Glagolitic was the initial language. We'll find out even St. Clement used Glagolitic in Macedonia in his own ministry as a missionary. Okay, so not to spend a whole lot of time overly summarizing the brothers, but we know that there a lot of opposition to their mission in Moravia. They went to the Pope in Rome, who blessed their work. Constantine died in Rome on February 14th, I think 842. No, he was tonsured as Saint Cyril on his deathbed, and Saint Methodius was consecrated a bishop. He went back to Moravia as a bishop, spent 3 years there, but most of the time in prison. Saint Methodius was imprisoned by the Frankish clergy, who were also contesting in Moravia for the loyalty of the people there. The Frankish clergy used Latin. They wanted Moravia to come under Latin control, contesting with the Byzantine missionaries. Methodius found himself in prison, languished in prison for 2 or 3 years, possibly even tortured, as some historians might tell us. Okay, so they translate a lot of works there, the scriptures, the services, things of those nature. Here's a nice text here. St. Cyril wrote a prologue to his translation of the gospel. He said the following: "Then hear now with your own mind, listen all you Slavs, hear the word, for it came from God, the word which nourishes human souls, the word which strengthens heart and mind, the word which prepares all men to know God." Okay, beautiful text from St. Cyril there. So St. Methodius died in Moravia 885. This will bring us to St. Kliment in just a moment here. As a kind of summary, the future of Slavonic Christianity was destined to be in Bulgaria and Macedonia. It is here that a culture based on the vernacular Slavonic language was to flourish and bear fruit throughout the entire history of the southern Balkan Slavs, spreading to embrace also the Serbians and Russians. So when Methodius dies, we'll find that his principal disciples were Kliment, Naum, Angelarius, Goraz, Sava, and Constantine the Presbyter. These are the key disciples of Methodius who travel now into the southern Balkans, having been expelled basically from Moravia. According to the historian Ohridski, 3 of them, Kliment, Naum, and Angelarius, came to the Danube, crossed the river on a makeshift raft made of the trunks of 3 lime trees, tied together with ropes of bark, and during the winter of 885-886, they reached Belgrade, which was then a Bulgarian territory. From there, however, Kliment, Naum, and Angelarius were sent off to Pliska. Come to that in just a moment here. They're in Bulgaria here, the new center of the Slavic Christianity. So St. Clement of Ohrid. We say St. Clement of Ohrid. So we know about his life from 2 basic sources. The first source is called The Long Life, written by Theophylact, Archbishop of Ohrid in about the late 11th, early 12th century. So Theophylact, Archbishop of Ohrid in the 11th, 12th century, writes the life of Clement. The shorter life is written by a certain Archbishop Demetrios Komationis, probably first half of the 13th century. So late 11th, early 12th century, that's the 1000s, 1100s, Clement died in 916. It's a fairly long gap there, almost 200-year gap between his death and this life of Bishop Theophylact. So the historians tell us that most probably the lives of these 2 archbishops were based upon earlier Slavonic sources, which don't exist to this day. Probably were some early Slavonic sources of their lives, of Clement's life, that the archbishops both used in their telling of the lives, a century or 2 centuries later. Theophylact, interesting person, a very kind of elitist Byzantine, who was shipped off to Ohrid as the archbishop, wasn't very happy about it, leaving Constantinople, where all his friends were there in his elite intellectual circles. He wrote a very fine life. I found the English language version finally, and I read through it this summer. Probably 30 pages or so. The short life is much briefer here. In the short life, we read that from Archbishop Demetrios, speaking of Clement's nationality, he writes, he drew his origin from the European Moesians, who also are known to most people as Bulgarians. As a Slav inhabitant of the Kingdom of Bulgaria, he probably came from Macedonia. So St. Clement was a disciple of Methodius, a direct disciple. Probably from his youth, he most likely assisted in creating a glagolitic alphabet for St. Constantine in the monastery of Mount Olympus in Bithynia of Asia Minor. So a good chance St. Clement was involved in creating the glagolitic alphabet together with Constantine and Methodius in Bithynia, a monastery in Asia Minor. Later in life, Clement wrote a long encomium praising St. Constantine quite a bit. He loved him as his teacher. So they're in Bulgaria. So very briefly, this is the Bulgaria that was converted in the 9th century. The Bulgars were a Turkic people who left Central Asia to settle in the Balkans under the great leader Asparuk at the end of the 7th century. The Bulgars were eventually Slavicized through the 8th and 9th centuries. The Bulgars were not Slavs ethnically. They were what called Turks or Turanian. They spoke a different language. They were Slavicized during the 8th and 9th century while they're in the Balkans. The Khan Boris was baptized in 864, received the name of Michael in baptism. He had his people also baptized. So, in terms of church politics, Boris was very uneasy about being under Byzantine control. He's being Hellenized. He wanted more independence for his church. So for a while, Boris flirted with the idea of going under Rome. The Byzantines convinced him by sending warships to Bulgaria not to go under Rome. Okay, so he stayed with Constantinople. That shapes their whole future destiny as Orthodox Christians, first under Constantinople, then independent of Constantinople. But he wanted to free his church from the rigors of Byzantine hegemonistic claims, and this could be done only by adopting the Cyrillo-Methodian vernacular tradition. So they used the Slavonic alphabet in Bulgaria to kind of forge a particular independence, cultural, linguistic independence from Byzantium, although they were strongly under Byzantine influence theologically and ecclesiologically. So, Slavonic replaced Greek and remnants of Proto-Bulgarian Turanian as the principal language of the state, and the dynamic Slavic culture became the tool for a true national identity. So St. Clement is sent to, I've got a map here. Let me look at the map for a moment. I've never been there, so you people here know this better than I do, okay? You've been there, so here's a map. This is kind of an academic approach here, all right? So I got this from Ohridski's book called 6 Byzantine Portraits, very fine book. It's a whole chapter on St. Clement, very beautifully written. So he ends up in, what's the name of his area here? Someone could probably help me with the name here. Hang with me just a moment here. How about Kutmitsinitsa? Does that sound familiar? Kutmitsinitsa? That was the overall region that he was located in. But if you look carefully, the towns were Ohrid, Diabolos, and a certain Glavinica. Glavinica on the map is called the Albanian Bausch on the coast of Adriatic there. So you see Ohrid there, Diabolos, and Bausch. Those are the three kind of areas or cities that St. Clement was kind of active in the late 9th and early 10th century. He was sent there in 886. He was sent to Macedonia in 886. So at this point in time, and again, this can be disputed or discussed, the Bulgarian Empire, the west part of the Bulgarian Empire was Macedonia, okay? The empire itself, the first Bulgarian Empire hasn't really started yet. That's not to Tsar Simeon, who's the son of Tsar Boris. That's a little bit later. But at this point, at the beginnings of that kind of emerging bit of Bulgarian Empire, western part is Macedonia. That's where Clement is sent in the late 9th century. The area was called Kutmitsinitsa, this name I have here, by Lake Ohrid and between Lake Ohrid and the Adriatic Sea. St. Clement left behind a series of monuments in Glavinica, or Bausch, probably stone columns that could be seen as late as the 13th century. The Austrian army discovered a votive stone in 1918 with an inscription referring to the baptism of Boris and his subjects. Kind of interesting, in 1918 they find this stone monument. St. Clement spent 7 years in this area. He had the title of Didaskalos. Didaskalos means he was a teacher. A good part of his time was spent preaching the gospel to both Albanian and Slavic peasants. And he probably used the glagolitic alphabet. The Cyrillic alphabet is being developed in Bulgaria, the eastern part of Bulgaria. The glagolitic is still in Macedonia here. He did translation work and he copied manuscripts. As a teaching method with children, interesting here, he would first have the children draw the shape of the letter, then he would explain the meaning of each letter. Finally, he would guide the hands in a motion of consecutive writing. It's a kind of little description how he taught children their letters and language. He believed that St. Clement taught 3,500 pupils. And according to the historian Robert Browning, he says the following: by any standards, this represented an educational undertaking almost without parallel in the Middle Ages. That 3,500 students St. Clement did, almost unparalleled education undertaking in the whole Middle Ages. The dialect of Southern Macedonia, to which his inventor adapted his alphabet, was the one that was spoken here in this particular region. He's founded a monastery of St. Panteleimon in Ohrid. There he trained native clergy, and the monastery contributed to Ohrid's fame as the cradle of Slavonic Christianity in the Balkans. So in the year 893, the Khan Boris countered a pagan reaction again among some Bulgarian aristocrats in his country. So there's a kind of a Bulgarian aristocratic reaction against the Christianizing the Bulgarians. And so to kind of counter this, he had his third son, Simeon, who reigned 893-927. He summoned St. Clement to Preslav and appointed him as a bishop. And according to Theophylact, the first one in the Bulgarian, that is Slavonic language, according to Theophylact, the first bishop in the Slavonic language is Kliment. Sent to a part, somewhere in the Rhodepi Mountains, we can see that on our map also there. We don't know the exact location there, becomes a bishop there for many years. Up until his death in 916. July 27, 916 is when he dies as a bishop in this part, it's called Dragvica or Velica. Does that sound familiar? According to Dragvica or Velica, we don't quite know exactly where it was. Somewhere in the Rhodepi mountain range. St. Clement has left behind three types of literature: hymns, lives of saints, and sermons. So that was very medieval. He's a great hymn writer. He wrote many lives of saints and sermons. He translated the entire Pentecostarion from the Greek, a massive undertaking on his part. So the Pentecostarion is a liturgical book with all the services of the whole Paschal season in the church. He translated the entire thing from the Greek. He knew the Greek very well, actually. There are 59 sermons and 18 panegyrics attributed to him. Only about 15 can be said with certainty to have been written by him, sermon writer and panegyrist. Scholars tell us today very high level of theology as a hymn writer and a panegyrist or a homilist, a very high level of writing on his part. But I can't resist quoting this passage here by Theophylact. With real condescension, he said this about the Bulgarian people. Okay, so here's what Theophylact wrote. Knowing the thick-wittedness of the people and their complete obtuseness in comprehending the scriptures, and aware that many Bulgarian priests, understanding with difficulty what was written in Greek, were trained only to read by spelling out the words that were hence beast-like. And because there existed in no festive sermons in the Bulgarian language, he composed sermons for all the feast days, simple and not clear, and containing nothing profound or elaborate, and not beyond the grasp of the most stupid Bulgarians. So that's what Theophylact wrote in the 13th century. He was a very kind of a Byzantine elitist who didn't like being up in Ohrid. So that was his condescension there. And even Ohridski chastised him quite a bit for that. Some think he might have helped in creating the Cyrillic alphabet, but probably not. So some might argue that he helped create the Cyrillic alphabet, but again, others will say probably not. It's kind of still a kind of a question there. So he was a bishop from 893 to 916. The year of his death, July 27th, he actually died in the monastery of St. Panteleimon in Ohrid. So summarizing the achievements of this entire kind of, Slavonic missionary activity, we can say the following. The beginnings of a distinctive Slavic culture and civilization based upon Christian principles. So the Balkans are Christianized and evangelized by Cyril Methodius and Kliment and Nahum in the 9th and 10th centuries. Very, very powerful movement here. One of the greatest missionary movements in Christian history, really. Think of millions of people for generations to come. So Christian people in the Balkans today come over to this country, but Christianized initially by these missionary brothers who gave them their own language, which is very important. So if we go back a little bit in time here, when Cyril and Methodius went back to Rome, they stopped in Venice. When they were in Venice, they were accosted by what's called the three-language heresy. The three-language heresy was the claim that the gospel could only be preached in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. That was the so-called three-language heresy according to St. Cyril. Only Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, only acceptable languages for the gospel. Why is that? Why is that? Why would they make that claim? Anybody?
Because they were rigorists. They thought that, you couldn't translate the whole
They were rigorous, but there's something more specific to it. They were rigorous, so why only Hebrew, Latin, and Greek?
On the cross.
That was on the cross.
Oh, okay.
The inscription on Christ's cross was in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. So the claim was you could only preach the gospel in those particular languages. Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. St. Cyril said, nonsense. Look at Pentecost. The day of Pentecost, the people in Jerusalem heard the gospel in many languages, not just Hebrew, Latin, or Greek. That fact means that the gospel is universal. Any language can be a vehicle to proclaim the gospel. That's how Cyril countered that so-called particular heresy. The liturgy was in Slavonic, as well as the scriptures, other theological literature originally written in Greek. So instead of having to hear the Greek, which is, that's the original language of the liturgy, they heard it in their own Slavonic language, their own kind of spoken language. The Slavs are raised to the level of a consecrated and blessed status, able to praise God in their own tongue, joining the great nations of the Christian world. The Slavs are now within the family of the Universal Church. I have a few little extra things to add here. I picked up an article by a certain Mihailo Popovic from Vienna, Austria, a Byzantine scholar. Just want to add a few, the continuing commemoration of St. Clement in the Balkans through the centuries here. He writes that, I'm just summarizing a little bit, St. Clement's relics rested in the Church of St. Panteleimon on the elevation of Plaoshnik, is that right? Plaoshnik, does that sound right? Okay, I'm getting nodding heads here by people who know more than I do, that's good. Okay, Plaoshnik. To the west of Ohrid's old town of Varos, and they were there from 916 until about 1385, 1395, when Ottomans had conquered the territory. Ottomans had forced the relics to be moved. They were translated to the Church of Mal Sveti Kliment, built in 1378, and then to the Church of Sveta Bogorodica Perivlepta, built in 1294-1295, lying at an elevation east of Plaoshnik. So there were three churches in the Ohrid area directly related to his commemoration: Sveti Panteleimon, alias Star Sveti Kliment, Mal Sveti Kliment, and Sveta Bogorodica Perivlepta, also called Sveti Kliment. The claim is these lasted until the year 2002. I'm not sure what happened to them in 2002. If someone knows something, that's also good to hear.
Well, I know they built a new church.
They built a new church. I heard, they built a new church.
Of Sveti Clement e Panteleimon, right there, where in the remains of where the old ones were.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Ohrid became the center of the artistic definition of the canon of the portrait of St. Clement. So our iconography is very consistent. You can tell a saint by his icon once it's first painted. My fault, a nice icon of St. Clement I wanted to bring here. I forgot to bring it, left it home, so my fault there. But he has like a large forehead showing his wisdom. He has a long beard, kind of a patriarchal look, very, very fine icon. That becomes the kind of distinguishing quality of his icon all through the centuries. We find that first in frescoes in a certain Sveta Sophia in 1045, the first of his iconographic representation that lasts to this day. There are 10 churches in Ohrid in which his icon can be found. 25 other churches and monasteries where his image can be found outside of Ohrid, creating a so-called sacred landscape of the saint. And then once the Serbians conquered Macedonia in the 13th century, Its iconographic image will travel into Serbia, other parts of the Balkans, including Greece, Kosovo, and Albania. So St. Clement had a very powerful memory. People remembered him well, very powerful teacher, passed through the Balkans for centuries to come. The University of Sofia in Bulgaria is called Sveti Kliment Ohridski, and also the patron of the National University Library in Skopje, also St. Clement. And also 1979 in Bitola, university called Universitet Sveti Kliment Ohridski. Is that correct? The people aware of that? Okay, hope that's good information. Okay. On August the 10th, 2022, the relic of St. Clement of Ohrid was taken from the Church of Sveta Bogorodica and translated to the reconstructed Church of St. Panteleimon, which probably you're referring to. So last text here, the life and aftermath of St. Clement of Ohrid is a vivid example how a saintly figure and his relics shape and still shape a sacred landscape in the heart of the Balkan Peninsula. That's it.
Thank you.
A little too brief maybe, but I'm hoping people have questions. Yes, please.
Father Stephen,
Yes.
First, thank you very much for being here with us today. My name is Kostoff. I'm Consul General of Bulgaria. Thank you for your presentation and for your service for the presentation. I just wanted to say that I'm very thankful that you made such a respect when you did this lecture on the life of St. Clement of Ohrid. This is a very special figure for all Bulgarians, for all Macedonian Bulgarians, and his legacy and his works are part of our identity. I'm very thankful that you mentioned the fact that actually the fact that the knyaz at this time, it wasn't the king, Boris actually was the king who saved the legacy of Saints Cyril and Methodius, because their legacy was doomed due to the fact that they were expelled from Veliko Moravia. And this is unique fact that actually exactly the Golica and his revision by St. Clement's Cyrillic alphabet became the fourth language. The Holy Bible, the Holy Books were translated.
So do you think he was part of the creating the Cyrillic alphabet or not? Do you have any opinion on that?
Excuse me?
Was St. Clement involved in creating the Cyrillic alphabet at all? Do you have?
Absolutely,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, because Golica was the first. It was used along, by the way, with another alphabet. I hope you heard about it. The Bulgarians, they had their own alphabet. It was the Ruins.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So for 2 centuries, actually, Golica and Cyrillic alphabet and the Ruin orthography, they were used together. The uniqueness of St. Clement's work is the fact that he managed to translate, to convert the Bulgarian dialects and orthograph alphabet, which made actually Bulgaria, along with the 2 other countries at the continent at this time. There were just 3 countries. This is unique, and a lot of people don't know that at this time there were just Bulgarian Empire, Frank Empire, and Byzantium. There were no other countries in Europe at this time.
That's true.
And actually from Bulgarian kingdom, the Christianity translated in Cyrillic alphabet spread around Europe, and now we are very proud on the fact that more than 400 million people across the world are using this alphabet. And Saint Cyril and Methodius are recognized by the Pope and by the churches, Eastern and Western churches, for I think they were officially recognized as
You know, the Pope recognized them officially probably a few decades ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're officially recognized as part of the European heritage at the European Union level.
Oh.
And so I'm very thankful that you elaborated on the life of Saint Clement, and we all should be proud of his legacy. And I'm also very proud on the fact that Bulgarian government and Macedonian government, today's North Macedonia, they agreed that this figure is part of our common history, and we're making progress to this dialogue. I have just one question regarding this map. It doesn't show where it comes from. Here is overlapping between the political entities and the region entities.
Right.
So Bulgaria is a political entity, Macedonia is a region, and it's a region, it's not political, and also Serbia didn't exist at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think he just did this to kind of give you a sense of the Balkans, but I understand your point. I understand, it's a good point.
It's not a political map,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's a good point.
And I am very thankful that exactly MPO is hosting this lecture, and again, thank you for your presentation.
I appreciate it, yeah.
Have a great
Those are three of the greatest missionaries in Christian history, you have to argue. I mean,
Yes.
It had such a powerful influence on the whole Slavic, the Balkans and Slavic Christianity. Yes, that's a good point. Anyone else, any questions or Alexander?
Also, I know in the Slovakia region, in fact, the West used the Glagolica for their mass up until the late 80s, I think, even.
Well, the Slavic liturgy lasted in Moravia probably till like 11th or 12th century, but then it just disappeared. Latin just kind of overwhelmed it. That's why it's Bulgaria, Macedonia that became the cradle of Slavonic Christian civilization, because the Moravians expelled them.
Yes, I was just saying, but the Latins in the West, because their Pope only approved of the Glagolica, right? The Cyrillic never made it over to them for approval. They preserved some of that up until that time, and even had their mass with the Glagolica. And in fact, our priest, Father Matthew, when he was visiting over there, he was able to see they had the books of the whole mass in the Glagolica. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There are monuments in Glagolica in Croatia, also all around Croatia, that are still preserved in original Glagolica.
At least remnants, yeah.
Right.
Right. Good point, thanks. Anyone else, anyone this general question? I enjoyed the summary we heard from our friend there. All right, yes, please. Yeah.
So while the day of Saint Cyril and Methodius, the May 24th, is celebrated in Bulgaria, in Macedonia, it's also celebrated in Rome because Saint Cyril is buried in Rome. It's a big celebration on that day of his legacy life. It is not celebrated in Serbia. And Serbia uses the Cyrillic alphabet to these days. So I was just wondering if
No, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
I see. They celebrate that feast day as well. It's in their synagogue.
I can't solve the dispute. I just don't know if it what is or not. I would assume it would be because all the Balkans depend so much upon them. So it'd be really kind of a mystery where they wouldn't. Saint Sava so dominates Serbian piety. Maybe kind of pushed out Cyril Methodius as a possibility. It's a possibility.
Right, but this is a very good point. We have this notion of Bulgarian saint, or there is a Serbian saint like Saint Sava or Sveta Petka. So we assign nationalities to the saints,
Right.
From today's points of view.
Yeah.
So Kliment and they are shared between Bulgaria and Macedonia. So all that concept is quite vague and not well defined when we assign nationalities from our point of view.
Right, because they probably thought of themselves as Roman.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
Yeah, I should have made that point that the so-called Byzantines called themselves Romans.
Yes.
Byzantium didn't circulate in the 17th century, a title given to the Eastern Roman Empire by certain historians. They consider themselves Romans. Now, whether Slavs like Kliment called themselves a Roman or not, I'm not positive. I mean, that could very well be the case. But it's interesting that Rome played such a key role in blessing the work of these missionary brothers, because Rome and Constantinople split a few centuries later in two different spheres. So they're a nice link between East and West. After East and West is broken in the schism, they form a link there, I think, which is important. Obadiah?
But it's interesting to me that in the Latin West, they really suppressed using other languages other than Latin, even though the Pope blessed Cyril Methodius with the translation of the vernacular of the
Right. You have a contrast between two missionary methods here. In the Latin West, Latin was imposed upon all countries who were Christianized. The Latin Mass, but in the East, the vernacular was always used of the people to whom you were evangelizing. So go to Russia, Serbia, Bulgaria, probably even Albania, whatever, they use the vernacular language.
And the Middle East.
Pardon me?
And the Middle East.
And the Middle East.
Northern Africa.
Use vernacular. So I think it's very important that they use that vernacular, you know, to help to kind of elevate in their own minds their role within the whole Christian economia. So I think there's a big difference there. This thing of imposing Latin upon the, to this day, I mean, some Roman Catholics insist on a Latin Mass even. That's a psychology, I think that's continued all through the centuries. I've encountered, you know, Roman Catholics like that. Doug?
Father, early in your talk, you spoke of the Slavs, and the Slavs came to that region. So I want you, if you can elaborate, who are the Slavs? And then also...
Probably can't elaborate.
Also, you said they sought evangelization, and I always think of evangelization in the other direction. So can you talk about that a bit?
I mean, there are people who tell who the Slavs are better than I can. The Slavs are in particular, I call them a linguistic ethnic group. They're poured into the Balkans by the late 6th, early 7th century. Some people claim they came from the marshes of near Transylvania, Romania. I mean, that's one theory. But they poured into the Balkans. They were linguistically similar, although different dialects. Once they settled there, they were pagan, and they saw themselves outside of this greater Byzantine civilization. They wanted to participate in it. That's why Rostislav of Moravia wanted to be part of this Byzantine Commonwealth. He sought at least some kind of enculturation, Christianization in the 9th century. That's the best I can do in trying to summarize.
Most cultures.
If someone can tell us even better who the Slavs are, I would love to hear it. It's a very complex issue. You know, the Bulgars were not Slavs. They were Turkic people. You know, they were Slavicized over a period of time. Just like in Russia, the initial conquerors of Russia, they were Vikings or Scandinavians. They were Slavicized over centuries. So an interesting kind of result there. Yes.
Thank you so much, Father Kostoff, for a wonderful presentation. I'm Ivan Dinov Ivanov. I teach at the University of Cincinnati. It's my first MPO convention. I think it's a very insightful conversation. Couple of things that, the questions, of course, where did the Slavs? So there's this big migration, Slavic migration theory about tribes, groups of people moving, originated. Remember, you have to put everything in context. What do we know about that period? And how did these people think about during that period? And so we approach 6th, 7th, or 9th century from the perspective of somebody who lives in the 21st century. That's not how the world worked in the 6th, 7th, and 9th century. One of the theories is that people moved from Nordic countries through Belarus, present-day Belarus,
right,
Ukraine, down to the south. They split. It's a theory. It's a theory that, through multiple different perspectives, archaeological work particularly, can be validated, partially modified, debunked. We know that people were moving at that time, and we know that there were some local populations, and we know that people kind of mixed up. How did this work out? It's a theory. But what we know for sure, based on plenty of sources and verified sources, is that by the Middle Ages, the key unit of analysis in the middle, in this period, was the state, in the medieval state. We don't call it modern state. Look at it. And so what happens is the formation of the state, the centralization, the medieval state is heavily centralized, one top leader on the top, and then you have, of course, military, because the military is what makes it possible. Conquering territories, controlling. And while talking about Saint Clement, we have to realize that Saint Clement was able to do for Cyril and Methodius, and then of course Saint Clement, the students, and were able to do what they did, and they did a fabulous work. They were great intellectuals. They changed and transformed the region. They changed and transformed Europe as a whole. But they did that because they had conditions that enabled them to do that, and those conditions were primarily fostered by the presence of centers of power and centers of resources, i.e. the medieval state. And so, of course, Byzantium was one of the center of force. the Western Roman Empire at that time, although kind of very much declined, was center of power as well.
Frankish Empire was kind of-
emerging, but at the heart of this was the Bulgarian Empire. It was the key decision of Boris to accept Christianity and Simeon, who actually during the Golden Age to build these cultural centers, one in Pliska and Preslav, and then the Ohrid. These were the two main. There was also a bunch of others to fund them and to tell them, hey, you need to translate the books, you need to build that cultural heritage, you need to educate the people. I mean, again, this is medieval way of thinking. You know? So while they were not thinking in the way we think about 21st century as nation states identities, they were moving away from what was the dark time of the Middle Ages into some sort of more advanced cultural level, you know, and laid the foundation for wholesale. So I just wanted to say that
very good.
we got to recognize also
That's very helpful.
contribute to the state.
I should have mentioned that because Kliment dies in 916, Simeon doesn't die until 927. So Simeon probably really helped expand and spread all the work that Kliment did, obviously. That was the great Bulgarian Empire, you know, that first empire. So it's a great figure, Simeon. That's a great summary there. I really appreciate that. And any other last comments, or we can depart in peace? I don't, you know.
I apologize.
We can return to the